Detective James Wilson stood at the entrance of the prestigious Bellona Club, his experienced eyes scanning the grand lobby. The morning sun cast long shadows through the tall windows, illuminating the body of Mr. George Pemberton, one of the club's oldest members, slumped in his favorite leather armchair. When was he last seen alive? Wilson asked the nervous club manager, Mr. Roberts. Last evening, around 7 p.m. We thought he was sleeping, as usual. He often dozed in that chair. Roberts twisted his hands. It wasn't until Thomas, our morning waiter, tried to wake him for his regular breakfast at 8 a.m. that we realized. Wilson nodded, jotting notes in his small black notebook. The victim, George Pemberton, age 75, was a retired banker and widower who spent most of his days at the club. No obvious signs of violence were visible, but something felt wrong. Who else was here last night? Wilson questioned. Our regular evening members, Colonel Matthews, Dr. Harris, Mr. Young, and Mr. Pemberton's nephew, Richard. Also, our staff, myself, Thomas the waiter, and James the doorman. Wilson circled the chair, noting the half-empty glass of brandy on the side table. Was this Mr. Pemberton's usual drink? Yes, he always had one brandy after dinner. But, Roberts hesitated. But what? Well, he was arguing with his nephew Richard yesterday. Something about inheritance. Richard left quite upset around 7:30 p.m. Wilson called in the forensics team. The preliminary report suggested poison traces of a powerful sedative in the brandy glass. The plot thickened when Wilson discovered that George Pemberton had changed his will just 1 week ago. Over the next few days, Wilson interviewed each person present that night. Colonel Matthews remembered seeing Richard handling his uncle's brandy glass while George was in the bathroom. Dr. Harris mentioned George complaining of feeling dizzy shortly after finishing his drink. Mr. Young recalled Richard's mounting gambling debts, which his uncle had refused to pay. The investigation revealed that Richard Pemberton stood to inherit everything unless his uncle changed his will. The new will, yet to be officially filed, would have left the bulk of the estate to charity. Wilson set his trap. He called all suspects to the club, recreating the scene from that fatal evening. As they gathered, he noticed Richard's eyes constantly darting to the drinks cart. Mr. Pemberton's death was no accident, Wilson announced. The killer knew his habits, knew exactly when he would take his evening brandy. The sedative used was prescribed to only one person in this room. Richard's face paled as Wilson continued. Dr. Harris confirmed that Richard had been prescribed the same sedative found in the brandy glass. When combined with alcohol, it becomes lethal. The killer counted on the death appearing natural, an elderly man passing away in his sleep. You can't prove anything, Richard burst out, then immediately realized his mistake. Actually, we can. Your fingerprints were on the brandy glass, Richard. You thought wearing gloves while adding the sedative would be enough, but you forgot about when you handled the glass earlier, trying to persuade your uncle to reconsider the will. Richard slumped in defeat. He was going to leave everything to charity. 50 years of family wealth, gone. I couldn't let that happen. As the police led Richard away, Wilson reflected on how greed could corrupt even family bonds. The Bellona Club would remember this unpleasantness for years to come, a reminder that beneath its polished surface, human nature remained unpredictable and sometimes deadly. The case was solved, but the true tragedy lay in how a nephew's desperation had led to his uncle's murder. The old leather chair, where George Pemberton spent his final moments, remained empty, a silent testament to the dark events that had unfolded in this prestigious establishment. The club's daily routines resumed, but members now glanced warily at the familiar chair, and the evening brandy service was notably less popular. Some said on quiet evenings they could still imagine George Pemberton sitting there, unaware that his final drink would be served by the hand of family. Wilson closed his notebook for the last time on the case. In his years of detective work, family murders were always the most tragic. The unpleasantness at the Bellona Club had revealed how the facade of gentility could mask the darkest of human emotions: greed, desperation, and betrayal.